Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to you, wherever you are in the world. I am Tigress Osborn. I am the chair of NAAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. Welcome to today's episode of the NAAFA Webinar Series, our first episode of 2023. We are joined today by Aaron Flores and Andrew Walen, who are going to be talking to us about men and fat and body image, men and masculine folks and fat and body image. And we'll get to our special guest in just one moment. First, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to our interpreters from Pro Bono ASL. Today's interpreters are Nathanael and Dresden. And you can learn more about Pro Bono ASL and their important work towards accessibility at probonoasl.com. For those of you who are new to NAAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance was founded in 1969. And since then, we have worked to make the world a better place through education, advocacy, and support. We have lots of exciting news coming up in early 2023 and lots of tremendous plans for the rest of the year. We encourage you to follow us on social media at NAAFA Official or to visit our website at NAAFA.org. And finally, if you've been with us for a while, you know we've been exploring some various perspectives on the practice of doing land acknowledgements. For those who don't know, land acknowledgements are a time when we pause during events to pay tribute to and to give shout outs to the folks who are the indigenous people of the lands where we are. There is some discussion about whether or not that practice is not enough in terms of respecting the indigenous folks where we are. There's some conversation about whether or not that practice perhaps gives people an indication that that's historical context and that doesn't do enough to talk about indigenous people and what they are going through wherever we are now. And so I just want to reassure our audience that we're continuing to explore ways at NAAFA to further our commitments to indigenous communities beyond land acknowledgements, but we have decided that we will continue to acknowledge where we are in this virtual space today. I am joining you from the physical space of Greater Phoenix, Arizona, which is O'odham land. And the Greater Phoenix area is actually home to many other indigenous communities. And we encourage those of you who are with us live to share where you are from and whose land you are on in the chat. And if you don't know the answer to that, to do a little research to find out whose land you're on so that you can begin thinking about how you can connect with and support in ongoing ways the indigenous folks in the areas where you are. So we invite you to share that if you're with us today, and to share those things with us whenever you're with us, and to continue to give us feedback about other ways that we can support indigenous communities. So thank you for all of you who have participated in the dialogues around that we've had so far. And we intend to continue considering the way to be, in right community with all of the folks around us, but with special honor to the folks who originally and still inhabited the lands that we are on. You can also check our anti-racism resources on the NAAFA website for some further exploration of this topic this month. And you can always check anti-racism resources for suggestions, ideas, and information about other ways that you can be anti-racist in your work and in your life. Today's guest, Andrew Flores, RDN.
Aaron Flores.
Sorry.
It's okay. We got a mix. We're like a combination of the both, right? Which is like the power duo.
I thank you for you're like the Voltron of body image guys. Aaron Flores, RDN, is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and a certified body trust provider. With over 10 years of experience, Aaron has worked with eating disorders in a variety of settings over his career, including the VA healthcare system and Center for Discovery. He currently has a private practice in Calabasas, California. Aaron uses intuitive eating, health at every size, and body trust as the framework to help individuals develop a more compassionate, non-judgmental approach to food and their body. His work has been featured on the 10% Happier podcast, in the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and BuzzFeed. Aaron is also a frequent speaker presenting at national and international eating disorders conferences. In addition to his individual work with clients, he is also a podcaster. His 2 shows are Men Unscripted and Dietitians Unplugged. Andrew Walen, LCSW and many other versions of SW in various places, is the founder of Dude Mental Health, psychotherapist, and a certified eating disorder specialist with a specific focus on males with eating disorder. He was the founder of the Body Image Therapy Center and vice president of eating disorders treatment for Refresh Mental Health. Andrew is the immediate past president of the National Association for Males with Eating Disorders, NAMED. Is that how y'all say it, NAMED? NAMED, thank you. Which merged with the National Eating Disorders Association, NEDA, in November 2019. He currently serves as NEDA's senior advisor on males with eating disorder. He is also a past founding board member of the Binge Eating Disorder Association, BEDA. He has appeared on The Today Show, was featured in the New York Times, USA Today, Men's Health, and many other national and local media outlets as an expert in the field of eating disorders and body image. In addition, he has authored numerous articles and presented workshops at national and international eating disorders conferences. His book, Man Up to Eating Disorders, which is a memoir and self-help book directed at males with eating disorders, was published May 2014. Andrew is a magna cum laude graduate of the University of Tennessee College of Social Work in Nashville. He also graduated from Berklee College of Music and is a published singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist who continues to write, record, and perform in the metropolitan Baltimore and DC area, and who we may invite to perform on one of our upcoming jazz brunches. I'm just saying. Ladies and gentlemen and friends of all gens, please welcome Aaron Flores and Andrew Walen to the NAAFA Webinar Series. Yay. Guys, let's start with your origin story about how you came to be doing the work that you are doing now. Aaron, if you will go first, will you tell us a little bit about anything that's missing from your bio that we should know and how you got to where you are in this field?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and very thankful to be here with Andrew to do this work. My guess, I can't confirm this across the board, but like a lot of other dietitians, I came to this career because I had my own stuff with food. And it was a career change for me. I was, this is in the mid 90s. So like this is the .com boom that was going on. I was a college dropout. I was working, making internet video games and really hated about every second of it and needed to do something different. Personally, I had struggled with food and body almost my whole life. I saw my first dietitian when I was 15. Didn't do anything she said, but I decided to do it all when I was in my probably early 20s, and she taught me eating disorder behaviors. And it was with that mindset that I decided to become a dietitian. So with a lot of humility, I actually came to this work from a weight loss perspective. And that's what I thought I was going to do. And it was through learning about intuitive eating first, doing some supervision with one of the co-authors, learning about other sort of weight inclusive philosophies, learning about body trust, health at every size. I really shifted. I was running a weight loss program at the VA and realized I can no longer do this, that I was doing harm to people. And it was also just incongruent with my values. And I quit, and I found I started a private practice, but I also had part-time jobs at different eating disorder treatment centers. And, that evolution took I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years, to be honest, for me to get here, to get to a place where I felt comfortable in these paradigms. Let me say that. It was a lot of unlearning, and I'm still unlearning. And to this day, though, this work is incredibly more rewarding than I ever thought it could be. It's also really hard, and full of challenges and ways in which I need to do my own work and support to get, to do this. I'm not perfect. I show up with a lot of these identities, but, and I don't have it all figured out, but I also feel like I have a support system that allows me the grace to fumble through it. Just to sort of give one piece to that origin story too. Andrew, I don't know if you remember this, but we had known each other online, I think, through Twitter probably. And I think we met in San Francisco at AED the first time. And we were out to dinner and I was sort of telling my story. And Andrew, I said I was never really diagnosed with having an eating disorder. And Andrew, you said something that still sticks with me today is like, what makes you think you didn't have an eating disorder?
Hmm.
I
just tell you, I was so scared to say that to you, but I kind of knew it had to be done.
Yeah. Well, I'm thankful for it. Yeah. And, it's something that I still hold. And I think that if I was in a different body and if I was a different gender, people would have been way more concerned. And they probably would have, diagnosed me with having an eating disorder. So yeah, that was just a moment that it still sticks with me. So, yeah, that's a little bit about my origin story. It's way longer, but that's for part 2.
That's right.
Thank you for taking us through the broad strokes of your origin story. Andrew, what about you?
It's pretty much an identical kind of story where I was indoctrinated into diet culture at an early age and body shamed by peers, being the kid who was teased and bullied for my size, which didn't really affect me when I was like in elementary school as much because there wasn't sort of a sexual component to it. I found that, so like I was the big kid who took 5 or 6 kids to tackle on the playground. And I took some kind of, ooh, that's kind of cool. I like being big, until it started going into, you're not dateable. And I had crushes on girls who wanted nothing to do with me. And I had siblings who reinforced that, if you were just thinner, you'd be happier. And even, my mother, who struggled with basically crash dieting and binge eating her entire life. And that core belief system about thin is good, fat is bad. Weigh yourself 2-3 times a day to see, are you doing the right thing? It was all normalized for me. And so I was, Weight Watchers at 12, and everybody was trying to fix my body instead of my anxiety or depression. And that eventually culminated in full-blown anorexia my senior year of high school, which nobody caught on to. Because what's typical in the research, was typical for me, is men who develop anorexia often start off in larger bodies. And so the anorexia simply looks like they achieved a normal weight. And it's only when they reach a severe and debilitating illness level that they are given any kind of attention to treatment. That was my story when the eating disorder was morphed from diet culture behaviors and binges to and fixations on exercise. I was also an athlete, but I was also told by coaches, you would be better if you were just thinner and didn't carry around that much size. So my dad, who was a physician, And by the way, my mother was also a psychologist, and again, nobody in either of their universes ever talked about eating disorders, so they didn't know from anything. And I don't blame them for what was done or said. They were subject to their own experiences of their parents and their experience. But my dad said, "Son, I feel I've failed you as a father. I've let you get so fat. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get you on a medically supervised weight loss, where if you don't lose the amount of weight that I expect you to lose per month, I won't pay child support." So I then felt like I'm a failure. I did this to myself. I failed my father. And again, my dad, his comments were, in hindsight, truly traumatizing to me. But I thought that I was the one who was doing wrong. Always had. So went into full starvation mode. I said, well, I can eat even fewer calories than that. And I was a 3-sport athlete, and nobody noticed that I couldn't perform anymore. I couldn't train anymore. I couldn't do any of the things I was trying to do. And that, by the way, my body was not all, like, I look at the pictures now and I go, I was kind of bigger, but I was a normal sized body. And that experience basically just kept going. I went to a psychiatrist after I also dropped out of college with severe depression and suicidality, and he said, "Oh," and I explained all of my disordered thoughts about my body and my self-esteem and my whatever. He said, "Oh, you just sound depressed. Here, have a blue pill." And so while the mood disorder lifted, the underlying eating disorder didn't, and the body shame and what have you. And I continued on to when I eventually went back to school in college, and I was told by my voice professor who said, only Black people can be fat and sing in popular music. White people have to be thin. And that was literally what I was told, is I had to lose an extreme amount of weight in order to make it in the music industry. And perhaps he was right, because when I went to Nashville, that was exactly what I experienced. I was told, essentially, I look too Jewish. I look too, I should have a nose job. I should have, lose X amount of weight. I was never accepted. And my talent was sort of, put on the back burner in my mind to my body. Eventually, I realized I didn't want to be in that world anymore, because my ego, my self-esteem couldn't take the constant rejection. And I moved into eventually having a son who had a major medical issue. And I became a full-time dad for my kid and decided to go to graduate school. And it was in graduate school where I encountered the first people I ever knew of who actually were either recovered from or actively struggling with an eating disorder. And I heard them talk about their experience and their body image issues. I was like, oh, that might be me. So it was that eventually led me to, I better get some help after I sort of hit my own rock bottom. And that was it. I started learning and educating myself and seeing that I was the only man in the room of any of the eating disorder conferences or treatment centers. And by the way, when I tried to get treatment, no program would take me because I was a man. They only treated women. So I wasn't even allowed in support groups because it would be too overwhelming, they thought, to the women to have a man in, dealing with the same issue as them. So eventually that's why I decided to become a therapist specializing in eating disorders, because there was no research, there were no books, there was no media. There's nothing for a guy like me. And what was available was about anorexia and not about somebody who struggled with compulsive exercise, crash dieting, binge behavior, and what have you. Eventually, that's that was my story. And so I find myself thinking here, like I have a level of comfort in this screen, just being the fat man that I am. No shame about having gynecomastia or my belly. And even in the eating disorders world, I often have a level of awareness that I'm judged for my size, and how can I understand and treat eating disorders being big? How could I understand somebody with anorexia? How could I understand a guy who's, with muscle dysmorphia? And I presented at a conference recently, and it was on eating disorders in the military. And I had, you get all this feedback. There was like 1,000 people who gave feedback. And a handful of people said, how can you have a fat person talk about eating disorders? They clearly are sick. So it continues no matter what I do. And so that level of comfort to me of being around people like this in this world, I think this is what guys miss. And I missed it. And I just want to tell this one story, and I apologize if I'm going too long, but I tell the story of when I moved back to Baltimore, which is where I'm from, which is in a large Jewish community. And I had just spent 12 years in Nashville among blonde-haired, basically LA with cowboy boots, right? I felt like I was supposed to look like Matthew McConaughey from Magic Mike. And, the blonde and chiseled and cut and what have you. And I got to Baltimore, and I went to the pool at the Jewish Community Center, and I'm surrounded by people who look like me. They had rounder bodies and back hair and balding and nice beards. I love Aaron's beard, and skinny arms and legs. And I was like, I looked at them and I'm going, my people. And I make this joke, and every time I give this a talk is, I realized I was supposed to look like Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof. That's what I'm supposed to look like, not Matthew McConaughey from Magic Mike. I'm supposed to look like Tevye, the Russian, milk farmer. That's my genetic basis. And that comfort and just being able to be who I am is something that it took decades to develop. And there's still the eating disorder brain that I identify that says you're not acceptable at the size that you are, because it's so indoctrinated in the first 30 years of my life. So while I can go, that's completely wrong, it's rational to say this other thing instead, there's still the reality of who we are and the communities that we engage in, and the expectation of masculinity says you have to be a certain way.
And I want to get into that next with y'all a little bit specifically about the masculinity, but I want to take a moment for folks to breathe, because we heard a lot of trauma in those origin stories. And I just want to acknowledge that as we continue to talk about the personal and professional aspects of this, there will be elements of trauma that will come up in this discussion. There may be some language that's troubling or examples that are troubling. So I just want us all to just sort of like take a moment to center ourselves and to and to think about just how much was packed into those origin stories around body image, around gender identity, around perceptions of race and beauty and health. There's so many threads that we could follow here, and all of these things are so nuanced that they're hard for us to cover in these short times that we have together. And many of them are things that people of all genders experience in relation to body image, in relation to disordered eating, in relation to anti-fatness. But I want to have you two do a little bit deeper dive into the piece around masculinity and the piece around men. Well, you tell me, if men keeping themselves out, men being kept out, men being left out, in these dialogues in the spaces, professionally and in terms of treatment. What are some of your thoughts about that? And I'll let the two of you talk to each other, and I'll stay out of it for a bit.
Well, I'm curious, Aaron, if you hear the dietitian's perspective, the language that people use might be a bit different than what the therapist might hear. So I'm curious what your experience is there.
Yeah. I mean, well, there aren't a lot of male dietitians. There aren't a lot of male dietitians who work with eating disorders, and there are even fewer that are fat. And there's probably even fewer that are not, that would practice from a weight inclusive approach. So like, I hear a little bit differently than a lot of folks because there aren't many folks out there who look like me. I think the interesting thing that I notice in doing this is I think there's a lot of, I don't know if we can pinpoint one reason why these conversations are not as accessible, or it's not, doesn't feel even as open for masculine folks to talk about this stuff. What I find is so often is that like it's sort of happening in silence. And, I think there's a couple things about that. I think one is much to what you said, Walen. I think there's this institutional, and why I said Walen, I don't know why I said your last name, Andrew, is like there's this institutional like framework that has excluded men for a lot of reasons, right? Like a lot of men couldn't go to residential treatment until fairly recently, and sort of being pushed out of treatment. I think that's sort of still persistent as a lingering factor for a lot of folks who have been suffering for a long time. But I think the other thing that is really is hard is that when folks, I think, do show up, if there's not a lot of folks that look like them or present like them, it's like, am I allowed to take up this space? Mm-hmm. Right? Am I, in a space, again, like you sort of said, like, I mean, it's where there is so much, Tigress mentioned it. There's so much trauma around eating disorders, and so much of that trauma for a lot of folks, female identified, is at the hands of men. And, it's like, as I enter this space, is it okay for me to take up this space? Am I, is it inherently changing people's experience? And so, I think those two things are very important. And then the last thing is, it's just such when it is just guys, right? And it is men talking, this topic is so taboo, and it's so like inaccessible, that I think the only way a lot of male identified folks know how to tackle it is through humor and making a joke, or making a joke about themselves or about someone else. And that is how we, enter this conversation, but there's no empathy in that. And so, again, why that moment that I mentioned of us talking in San Francisco was so powerful, right? Is because there we were, two dudes, right, sitting along the wharf, talking about our bodies and it feeling okay. And that doesn't happen very often for people, I don't think. And I wish it did.
I wish it did too. And, the issue of stigma and shame, that I need help is the biggest struggle I personally had. And even beyond getting into treatment and recovery, I still struggled with the basic concept of asking my wife for any support or help in anything.
Yeah.
I just was under the expectation, if you can do it for yourself, do it.
Yeah.
And, only when you've completely given up and failed do you get any help.
Yeah.
So to express vulnerability, is, in my mind, what I avoided. And so a lot of why I didn't talk about what was literally eating me led me to emotionally eat from the earliest memories I have. And that's what led to, being the kid with the chubby body that was the subject of emotional and verbal abuse. And so again, nobody wanted to talk about my mood or what was upsetting me. It was, let's just fix the body.
Right.
That's the
Yeah.
solution.
Yep.
You can be in control of it, but
Yeah.
that wasn't the issue.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I get the very same thing of like, it's all about the food. Right. And
Right.
let's fix the food. And one of the things that I think shocks a lot of people when they start to work with me is like, I don't talk about food hardly at all. And, there's a lot of reason for that. And because it's really not about the food. And so, so what I notice also, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on this, is sometimes like when I'm especially working with men and it's like their first time sort of doing this, it's like, I don't know if I have language for all of the things that's going on and like how hard it is to like, for some folks, they're adults, right? Is like, how do I find the words to describe all of these like sort of very challenging things to sit with feelings. And you're right. It's like so much vulnerability to even come forward and say, yeah, I can't do this alone.
And in all honesty, when you do decide to look around for help, what is typically available is female centric. And that then you start to feel like an other for yet another reason. And that was my experiences. I was tired of being otherized for my size, for, my being a man in a room filled with women who were talking about things that I didn't necessarily relate to, because my experience was, again, the language is different. I wasn't worried about thinness as much as I was worried about muscularity. I was worried about leanness. I wanted to be able to see striations and the musculature. I remember trying to get as thin as I could, but with the expectation of I also wanted to be as muscular as I could. And when my body broke down from compulsive running and exercise, I thought, well, I can't get as lean as I want to get. I want to get as big as I can get. I started becoming a compulsive lifter to be, it was all in a pursuit of some kind of masculinity that I perceived as idealized, that would then make me attractive and desirable. And so much of this is tied to sexuality. And one of the comments I remember when I was, from my friends was, why don't you take your shirt off at the beach? Why don't you take your shirt off at the swimming pool? From my father, how can you take your shirt off when you're in bed with a woman? It came down to that basic concept, and it was very. It just was a different language, and it hurt that nobody understood why I was saying what I was saying. But it also hurt that I felt like I was diminished by some of the individuals who I was speaking with, and in a room with women who didn't quite get it, what my experience was, because not intentionally, but there is often guys don't have the same issues as we do, and we'll make fun of guys that they don't have these emotions, they don't have these feelings, that, they don't have these struggles. And so we might joke about them, and I'm going, haha, funny, haha, and trying not to be hurt, but also trying to not offend them. So I'm in this constant state of what's my avenue to be able to talk.
Yeah.
I didn't have one.
Yeah. I think that's why something like this, and organizations like NAAFA, to me, are so important. Is like, one of the first times that I was around other fat folks who were unapologetic, again, not necessarily loving, right, but just unapologetic. Right. Like, this is who they are. Right. It felt really like I can take a deep breath and let it all out, right? And noticing how often I'm sort of holding my breath in other spaces. And I think, there's something so, I don't know, I think the theme that keeps coming up for me, and it has been for some time, some of the notes I wrote down, is just how powerful it is to be in spaces where you feel seen and understood. And when it's rare to find them, unfortunately. I think that's slowly changing. But I think there's something about being able to exhale and be in your body in front of other people who, again, are going to see you for that is a really healing moment,
and not judge.
And not judged. Right.
Just there's a real sense of empathy rather than, sort of observation. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can I come in here just to ask a question? One of the things that I hear from people about in terms of criticism of men, especially cisgender men in fat liberation spaces, is that that they show up to benefit from the spaces that have been created, but they don't show up to do the work of creating the spaces. And I'd like to have the two of you talk about that, both in terms of whether you think that's a fair or accurate criticism in fat lib spaces you've been in, but also in terms of what you are doing in your work to be men creating some of those spaces.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think understanding from part of the unlearning and evolution of this work for me is understanding my privilege in a space, right? And how it, being a white passing cis male, straight, het male coming into a space. Yeah, there's a lot of privilege, all over, and how I show up in a space is going to be different. What has been interesting is being in a mostly female identified profession and eating disorder space, is that privilege changes a little bit. But I think, I really do think about how can I show up in this space and know that the ways in which I do is going to be impactful. How much listening can I do? Right? How much can I hear other people's stories and also feel comfortable to share mine? But I think listening is a very important thing that I try to do first in a lot of spaces. And then the other part is, one mentor told me a while ago is, feedback is a gift. And, I think if I were to have received feedback years ago, I would have done what most people do, and that's get defensive. And when I really sort of sat with feedback as a gift, and to listen and to have empathy and to understand that person's, the reason that feedback is important in their story, I think it's changed a lot for me for, again, how I show up, to know that I'm learning. I can't, I'm not going to get it right. But I also, but if I don't even allow myself to enter the space, right, I don't get the benefit of community. So I need to be in the space, but I also need to be humble in it. So I don't know if that's long-winded or if that hit what you're sort of asking, Tigress.
Mine was sort of similar, if you don't
Yeah.
mind. I was talking and promote out. So I was opening up a residential treatment center in Maryland for eating disorders. And I was talking about how I really was trying to create a space as I'm doing this promotion into different social media areas, including Health at Every Size Facebook group. And that it was really going to be inclusive of all body sizes, really health at every size. And somebody challenged me, how will you treat somebody who is my size? And they're describing themselves as a very large individual. And I've learned enough to say, I don't know what you need. You are the expert. You tell me what you need. How would I make this inclusive? And instead of feeling attacked, which was my initial instinct, I immediately was like, hold up, it's not about you. It's about him. Let's talk about it. And what can I do? How would I make this work for you? And he gave me a multitude of his concerns wherever he's been in the past, at a doctor's office or what have you. And I said, great, this is a great list. Now, what I had to do was then go to the corporate money folks and say, hey, I need money for this. And that I had to convince them that this was reasonable money to spend. And there's a privilege that comes from being where I've gotten to professionally, where I have clout enough to go. I know what I'm talking about. Trust me on this. This will be useful, and this is helpful for the people as well as for us. And that's what I think. You're right. There's an engagement that you have to have of recognizing we are individuals of privilege that I wanted to do this for me, like, why did I create the Body Image Therapy Center and then, create, these other organizations? I needed it for me, but I also I recognize there's a whole lot of people who need help that are not exactly like me. And I have to keep opening the door wider and wider and wider. I got the door open, but I have to keep pushing it further.
Well, that's actually a really beautiful tie-in, Andrew, to the question that we have from the audience. We just, the time has gone so quickly. I know you all joked about the second part, but we may need to actually schedule a second part with you. But that piece around opening the door wider, and finding each other, how you all find each other, and then how you open the door wider. The question is, as a trans masculine person, starting to understand my gendered thoughts about my body is really helping me recover from eating disorder. I would love a space where I can explore those thoughts with other masculine people, trans or cis or both. Is there such a space? Can we, talk in some of the time that we have left about what the spaces are that do exist already, your own work and other things that you know?
Can I share something that really frustrates me is how hard that is to create. The research in terms of gender and body image and eating disorders has really shifted to talk about gender expression as opposed to gender assigned at birth, and that is a way in which we need to be thinking about this. So I created a support group that I opened up to anyone identifying as masculine. And to talk about body image and eating disorders. And I promoted it everywhere I could think of. And by making it international, I thought, great, we were definitely going to have a lot of people. And everyone I was sharing it with was going, yes, really interested. But then who actually showed up? I couldn't get on a given week across the globe 3 people plus to participate. And I thought, all right, well, let's back it up. Let's go every other week. That wasn't, I still couldn't do it. And then nobody wanted to do once a month because they wouldn't remember or wouldn't commit. It was so hard. And even the very first group, I had 8 people on my screen and nobody would talk until one really good guy. And I think it's funny. Everybody was, it was like an Iranian and a Canadian and a South American and then a bunch of folks from all across the United States. But it was the one guy in Canada who said, "This is really freaking scary." And finally, everybody leaned back, was like, "Yeah, it really is, isn't it?" And finally, they broke through and started talking. But it was sort of like, okay, I breathed, I'm good now. And then they disappeared. And it was so hard. So I wish I knew how to build that community. I'd love to hear. I know Aaron's got this great podcast, and
yeah. Debbie, you should. I'll put my email in there. But I do run a men's group. It's for anyone who identifies as male. We meet every other Tuesday for an hour and a half. It's virtual, and I've been doing it for a few years now. It's a small group, but it's like I don't know. It's probably the most fun I have all week is that group. And fun meaning I am oh shit, this is, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse, is this is the best thing I'm doing. This is great. This is I'm incredibly grateful for a space where people can talk openly. And what I've really appreciated is that nothing's off the table. There are men talking about being intimate with their partners. There are folks talking about taking their shirt off at the pool. There's folks talking about, some of the most intimate things in their lives that I think don't get discussed about, and people are just listening and supporting each other. So hit me up, either find me on Instagram. That's probably the best way to do it. Anyways, I also, I know Fed Up Collective has some great trans groups out there, and I would check out their site. I think it's fedupcollective.org, and you can check out some of their stuff. And then I do have a podcast called Men Unscripted, and I've had folks come on. They're anonymous. There's a couple trans stories on there, and they just talk about their body story. And again, truly intimate. When you don't have to share your name and no one's going to know it's you, people really open up. And I think, here's the thing that I think is an important thing to think about with groups is, like Andrew said, it's the space to create that takes a lot of work. And I think what is really rewarding is being able to sort of have people come back. But I think it takes, there's a lot of group dynamics to manage, and finding the right group is hard. And I wish that I could give you a 10-page list like I could for someone of a different gender who could go to any group from any treatment center. But I think more treatment. I also think more treatment centers are offering men's groups. So I think, checking big groups like probably Center for Discovery or Alsana, they might be doing that as well. So, I think there's more coming. There's not that many right now.
So unfortunately, we need to start our wrap up here. I want to make sure that folks do know how to find each of you so they can follow up with you about your specific offerings or other things that they might want to know about from you. So Aaron, where can folks find you?
Yeah, my home address is, no, just kidding. Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's at Aaron Flores, RDN. I will put it in the chat, but I also put my email. It's aaronfloresrdn@gmail.com. I see people individually. I have groups. So if you're interested in learning anything or more about that, or even possibly wanting to come on my show, my podcast, shoot me an email.
And Andrew, where can we find you?
So I am at Dude Mental Health, which is DUDEMH.com. And you can, my email is andrew@dudemh.com. And I have collected as many resources of every media type that I can find to date on masculine related resources about body image and eating disorders, and I'm happy to share whatever I've been able to cull together. I love just hearing people's stories and helping out in any way I can. My goal at this point is more teaching than anything else, and supporting and advocating. So let me know.
Thank you both, Andrew Walen and Aaron Flores, for being with us today to dip our toe in the pool of these, many areas of discussion that we could have about masculinity and body image and fat. For those of you who are with us live, our hardworking administrator, Darlene Howell, has just dropped in the chat a survey form. You can indicate on that survey form feedback about both of our guests, but also feedback to NAAFA about what you would like to see us do more of, particularly around these issues. And one thing that you should know is that we are exploring ways and means and systems for having more identity-based opportunities for people to gather, in their shared identities. So if that's something you're interested in as a man or a masculine identifying person, just let us know that, so we know that interest is out there and we can help facilitate that. And of course, we are able to offer webinars like this through the generous support of our FAT community and ally community who give to NAAFA. We are able to do these free of charge for our participants, and you can support that by going to naafa.org/give to make a contribution to NAAFA today. Again, thank you both for being here with us, and we'll be staying in touch with you and exploring that possibility of a part 2. And I thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to our friends at Pro Bono ASL. And we will see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.